Let's create a query now that will perform calculations using our date and time object with our new table. So again, back to the Create tab, back to creating a query in Design View, and this time we're going to perform another join operation with three tables. We want employee, we want time clock, and let's do payroll type. We'll add all those tables in. And let's create our relationships. So employee ID to employee ID, employee ID to employee ID, and employee ID to employee ID. There. Okay. And with our relationships configured, let's pull down employee ID as our first. And we'll pull down, we'll do the next two as employees. So first name and last name, or last name and let's do last name and first name. Alright, so employee ID, last name and first name. And in this example for figuring out time data, again, we don't really care about salaried employees. We're going to work them like dogs with lots of overtime anyway, right? They're salaried. We only care about the hourly employees. Mwah. So let's do payroll type, and we'll pull down whether or not they are salaried. And let's specify for criteria. No, they're not salaried. No, not now. No. Boy, hitting tab there, but it just wanted to auto-complete with the now function. That's kind of annoying, but you can turn that on and off. Anyway, criteria is no, based on whether or not they're salaried. And let's go ahead and do the calculation, and let's format it as a number. Alright, and it's going to be, let's see, we'll just call this hours worked. Maybe daily hours worked. How about that? Boy, I'm telling you. Daily hours worked. Alright. Just hit the arrow key one time too many. Alright, let's see. We'll want to do some precedence here, and we'll want to, we can't just subtract, like, yeah, we look at in and out, and it wouldn't it be nice if we could just subtract the in from the out and do the calculation that way. But the problem is that Access, in the calculation, when you subtract one time from another, it'll only render the decimal portion of the difference. Alright, so we would end up having to multiply it by 24 to present it in hours in terms of a 24-hour time scale. But to show you what I'm talking about, I won't do that at first, and then we'll come back and multiply it by 24, and you can see kind of what I'm talking about. So when we do that, we'll need parentheses, right? We'll have to change the precedence. But for now, if it's just subtraction, there's no difference in binding, as there would be between multiplication and subtraction. So there, at this point, we won't have to make it a parenthetical expression. So I just want to do, in this case, out and subtract in my field data here. Didn't want to do that either. There, Butterfingers, right? So in square brackets. So we'll subtract in from out, and this time we won't multiply by 24, just to show you the strange results that we would get. And you could make the formatting number if you want. I'm not going to change the formatting by default, just to show you what we get. So I'm going to go ahead and save the query, and I'm going to say yes, and we'll call it query, and we will call this time clock data daily time clock data. How about that? That's what we'll call it. Alright, so daily time clock data, and if I run the query, pull this out here, notice what I'm getting here from my hourly employees. It's not in an hourly format. I'm just getting the decimal portion, alright, in the subtraction operation, in the difference. So what I want to do is, let me open this in Design View and show you what I'm talking about. So in this case, I would want to multiply this times 24 to put it in a 24-hour time scale. The problem is this is going to bind tighter. So it's going to try to attempt to multiply in by 24 before it subtracts in from out, and that wouldn't give us the results we want. So to change that or modify that, we have to make it a parenthetical expression. So you use your parentheses to change the default precedence. So I would nest that inside of an outer body of parentheses, and then that says, okay, do this first and then multiply it by the 24, and then you're good. So let's go ahead and save that. Yep. And let's run the query. Now we can see the actual hours worked. Alright, so I put in 10 hours, Joe Smith put in 6.68 hours, and Reed Johnson put in 11.45. Next kind of query we're going to do is a potentially volatile query, but a very useful one. It's called an update query. And an update query will actually modify or change table data. That can be a good thing or a bad thing. So in other words, if I were to open up the payroll type table, notice for my hourly employees, I have their hourly rates here. And my salaried employees, let's say that I wanted to give everybody a 4% cost of living increase, across the board. And we'll do this first for our hourly employees. Well, I don't have that many employees here in Acme, so I could just do it manually and it wouldn't be a big deal. But imagine if I had hundreds or thousands of employees. That would be very inconvenient and time consuming. As well as introduce the possibility of errors in bookkeeping and data entry. So a good alternative, a good option for this would be to create an update query that modifies the data in this table to add that 4% cost of living raise. Now when you do that, Access by default will usually disable many different types of update operations because it's potentially volatile. I mean, if there is a mistake in the query, you could lose data. You could end up losing a lot of data because it could radically alter your table data or delete records and do all kinds of things. So it'll disable it by default. You'll have to enable it to actually perform or run the query. And you would always really want to back up your database before doing a major operation that's going to affect a lot of records or do an update like that. Okay, so anyway, in this particular situation, why don't we go ahead and create an update query? So I'm going to go to the Create tab, and I'm going to click on Query Design. And in this example, the first example, we'll just add payroll type. Okay, and in payroll type for our update query, remember how when we created a totals query, we went up here and clicked on this button? Well, for update, we have to go over here and click on this button. See the exclamation point? Notice that there's no update to field here, or row yet, but watch what happens when I click the button. Now it appears update to. Okay. And in this first example, we're not going to choose salaried, so I'm going to select salaried from payroll type, and the criteria is going to be no, not salaried. And then the next thing I want to do is select hourly pay for our hourly employees. And what do I want to update it to? Well, the field data is hourly pay, so hourly pay in square brackets. And then I'm going to multiply, and then a 4% would be 1.04, right? In decimal value, their current pay plus an additional 4%. So that would be a 4% raise across the board. There are other things we could do too, like instead of multiplication, let's say that I was just I'm going to give my hourly employees a 25 cents an hour raise. Then I could just simply add 0.25 instead of multiplying by 104 for a cost of living increase. Either way, so let's say that we did that first. All right, we'll multiply 1.04 for our cost of living raise there. Okay. All right, and then so in other words, it'll take the current value of their hourly pay and multiply it by 1.04 for a 4% across the board cost of living raise when we run the query. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Yes, I want to save the changes. We'll call it query and update hourly pay rate of cost of living raise. Boy, that's a long unnecessary name, but hey, whatever. Update hourly pay rate with cost of living raise. Okay. Alright, so now before I run the query, let's just show the table. I look at payroll type, notice 001 is $100 an hour, 004 is 25, 005 is 45. See the results before the query. Now when I select the query to update, notice here, you go here and here and alright, so let me go ahead and run the query here. And by default, this I would have had to click on options, and I may have to enable the query if it's not, if I haven't previously enabled that. But in this case, it's going to warn me, you are about to run an update query that will modify data in your table. Are you sure you want to run this type of extra query? I'm going to say yes. And then it'll tell me, well, this is going to affect 3 records. Remember, I only had 3 records where the employees were not salaried, they were hourly. I'm going to say yes. Alright, so it applied that 4% cost of living. So now let's go look at the payroll type table and notice instead of $100 an hour, he's making $104 an hour. Instead of 25, he's making 26 an hour. And instead of 45, he's making 46.80, or whatever he previously made. So I could do that. Now, likewise, let's say that I'm just going to copy and paste, and we'll say update hourly pay. 25 cents. I can't do that right. Let's just say 25 cents. There we go. Alright, so 25. Let's say that I want to do this. Let's open it up in design view. Instead of saying this, I could also do this. Like, let's say I just wanted to give him a quarter. And then, not 25 there, but let me make sure that's 0.25. I could also do that, right? And then run the query. We'll save it. Alright, so now, again, notice their wage data, right? 104, 26, 46, 80. So if I wanted to give them a quarter raise, I could run the update query. It's going to warn me again. Affect 3 records, yes. And now if I pull up the table, notice there's their quarter raise. So just 2 different ways of doing an update query. And of course we could apply the same for the salaried employees, right? We could give them a cost of living raise. We ran a couple of update queries before, and they potentially can radically alter table data. Now let's do a delete query, and we have the same risk as well as the same utility here. So I'm going to create a new query in design view. I'm just going to add employees, and let's say that Acme Acres, or our company Acme, we've created a new subdivision where we're going to move our Chicago, Illinois, and New York employees too. And whereas we're going to retain our Florida and Arizona employees at headquarters or in the old division. So if that were the case, I'd want to this time create a delete operation. So remember, we've done totals over here, we've done update over here, now we're going to do delete. When I do, notice it adds this row in. Delete wasn't there before, but when I click the delete button, it adds it. And then basically of all these fields, the only one we really need is state data. So I'm going to select state, and notice it by default specifies where. I could say from as well, but where is what I want. And criteria, now remember that you have and you have or, and you can specify, remember the and says both sides of a statement or expression have to be true, or it says only one side has to be true. And the differences, they appear subtle, but they can be profound in the action they would have on the database. So in other words, if I were to say, the Visual Basic method of saying, not equal to, of course in Java or C++, you'd do that either way, but same thing. So basically I want to say where it's not equal to Florida and not equal to Arizona. Okay, I want both of these to be true. I only want to delete that record if it's neither Florida or Arizona. So both sides have to be true with and. Now that's subtle. If I made this or, only one side has to be true. And at first glance that might look like it's okay, but you have to kind of think about, you know, what it's really saying. So let's say if either, you know, it's not equal to Florida or it's not equal to Arizona, delete it. It's not demanding that both be true. So going through records, if it finds one that's Florida and it says, well, he wants me to delete it if it's not equal to Florida or if it's not equal to Arizona, well, it would go ahead and delete that record. So if I pass this in as criteria, it would delete all 7 records. That's not what I want. There's only 2 records that are neither Florida or Arizona. And so instead of or, I want to specify and. I want to specify that both sides of the expression would be true. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and save that data. Yes, and we will call this query delete non-FL and AV employees. Alright, that's what we'll call the query. Notice the little red X that appears there. And again, it's just a potentially volatile operation that could be disabled by default, in which case I'd have to click on options and enable the operation. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. Well, before I do, let's look at our employees table. Notice we have 3 employees that live in Florida, and we have 2 employees that live in Arizona, 1 in New York, 1 in Illinois. All right, so a total of, in this case, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 employees. So let's go ahead and run the delete query. It's going to warn me and say, hey, are you sure you want to do this? I click yes. Hey, I'm going to delete 2 rows from the specified table. And if I say yes, then it performs the query. Now if I look at tables, now I only have 5. And it's only Florida and Arizona. Okay, we could sort on that. If we wanted to. We could do Florida, Arizona, whatever. But so you get the idea. That's just an example of a delete query. Let's say you have a query where you want access to ask the user for some particular data, or allow them to perform a search based on their own specified criteria. You can do that with a parameter query. Alright, so again, I'm going to click on the Create tab, create a query in Design View. This time I'm going to throw 2 tables in there, employees and payroll. Let's do payroll biweekly hourly earnings, these 2. I'm going to join and make my relationship here between employee ID and employee ID. That's compound primary key, but I just need these here. And I'm going to go ahead and on the employees table, I'm going to add key value of employee ID, last name, and first name. Okay, so throw those in there. And drag line those columns below, drag that back. Alright, so I have employee ID, last name, and first name. And now I'm going to do, let's see, why don't we throw in just the hours that they worked. Alright, we'll do a query based on the hours that they worked. So I'll select payroll biweekly, and let's look at the hours that they put in. And let's see, actually let's specify, well, I'll tell you what, the criteria, let's base this on the criteria. So we'll let them specify the week, and then they can pull up for you know, for a particular week, you know, hours that may have been worked during that week. And week number, we'll add week there. And let's go ahead and we'll add hours here. So throw this in, and we'll do hours there. There you go. All right, so that'll be the week, and that'll be the hours that they work for that week. And then they could just look up a particular employee ID, or last name, or first name, or whatever we decide to make the parameter data. Okay, and then the criteria, the way to make it a parameter query, if Access doesn't know a value, like if I put a field name in here, like SSN or last name or employee ID or something, one of these field names up here, then it wouldn't query, it wouldn't create a pop-up box and query the user for it. But if it's something it doesn't know, then yes, I can put that in here as query information. So for employee ID, I could just say input employee ID. Alright, let me pull this out some. So since it doesn't know, there's no field called input employee ID, it's going to basically make a little pop-up window pop up and ask me, type in that employee's ID. And at that point, it would take that information and make that the criteria, and then show me this information for that particular employee. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. And do you want to save changes? Yes, we'll call it query. And this is an example of a parameter query. Parameter query, so query parameter. Let's call it employee time data. How about that? Employee time data. Alright, so it's parameter employee time data. And I'm going to run the query. Notice a little pop-up box pops up here, and that's what I typed in those square brackets. So input employee ID. Let's say I want to look up myself. 001. Click on OK, and here are the hours that I worked. On the other hand, let's see, who else do we have here? Who's not been deleted? Let me reorder this here. So we've got 002, 003, 07, and 08. So let's look up a few more employees here. So we'll go back and let's do our parameter here, and let's look up 008. That'll give us her hours for Jenny Jackson. Let's look up 007. And there's Stacy Smith, and there's her hours. Okay. Let's say that I didn't want to base it on employee ID. Let's say I wanted to base it on last name. I could get more than one record that way if I wanted to do that. So let me open up my parameter query in design view, and I'm going to pull this criteria out, and let's say that I was just going to do it by name, right? I could say enter employees last name. Pull this out so you can see it. Alright, so now the pop-up box will say enter employee's last name, and that string value will become the query, or the data, or the criteria upon which the query is based. Excuse me, Sam. Now the thing is, I also need to make sure, in this case I went in and I added another employee just to show you what would happen if they both had the same last name. But remember when I created the parameter query, that there's a relationship, right? There's a join operation between data here and employees and data and payroll. So in addition to having Ann Smith, whose last name matches Stacy Smith, in the employees table, I would also have to have in payroll biweekly hourly earnings matching records because of that join operation or that relationship. So in other words, 009 as well as 007. And then if I did that and I were to perform a search just to show you what would happen if there were more than one record. Again, remember, it's no longer based on the primary key employee ID, but on the employee's last name. Well, the primary key is always unique, but what if there's more than one record that matches the criteria? In this case, there are. In this join operation, in this relationship, two records, called Smith, that match the criteria. So if I run the query, I type in Smith, notice I get 007 Stacy Smith and 009 Ann Smith.